Hello everyone, this is Nathan, and as I mentioned earlier in some other videos that I made, I am going to be reading some books over the next couple of months and doing some reviews. So this is my first review. It's for the book Organic Student Ministry by Stephen Ingram. Trash the prepackaged programs and transform your youth group. How about that graphic? Anyway, so I just want to briefly talk to you about this book. If you are a youth minister or someone who is thinking about youth ministry, I think that you should get this book and you should read it. Now, I know lots of us went to seminary or we're in school right now, finishing up seminary, and you're like, Nathan, I read a lot of books then. I don't really want to read anymore. And that's why I'm going to review this a little bit, maybe entice you to read it, because I really think it's an excellent book. It's short, it's only 120-something pages, but it really has a lot of awesome information in it. So here's some stuff that I really liked. A couple of chapters that stood out. And basically the book is trying to get you to think about your youth ministry in less in a programmatic sense and more in a practice organically sense. So let me talk about some chapters that really, right off the bat, kind of does a good job of framing what he's getting into as the author. And then in one of the first chapters, it's called Grafting In. And basically it's an approach to when you first arrive at a church, within the first year of your church, how to go about approaching that. And he sets up kind of a dichotomy of how lots of youth ministers go in and either burn everything to the ground, he calls it Machiavelli, or Plato, and where everything kind of gets amalgamated and just poured in there and you just kind of do everything. And he talks about a third way. I'm going to leave that for you to read about, but I just think it's a really good start to talk about youth ministry in a different way. Another thing that he talks about in one chapter, it's called locavore, and locavore student ministry, basically playing off food, being someone who eats local. This is one thing I like about this chapter is it talks about you being the person who is the main PR person for your church, for youth ministry, that you can't rely on other people to frame what you want them to think about your youth. Because 9 times out of 10, they're going to think negative. And so the idea is, how do you create a not just day-to-day communication with the church, but a bigger scope about what you're communicating about your youth ministry. What is it that you all are accomplishing through your meetings and your trips and stuff like that? So excellent chapter. Really enjoyed that. Another chapter is called A Time to Plant and Harvest. Maybe I'm misquoting that a little bit. But the idea is talking about the best ways or best practices to get a framework for your youth ministry. So looking outside of just programs, but looking at your DNA. And it talks about hospitality, belonging, challenge, and expectations. And I think it's another excellent chapter. He also gets into another chapter called Cage-Free Mission. I just wanted to read this short little passage to you. It's from page 62 of Organic Student Ministry. It says, our job, meaning youth ministers, is to allow our students, better yet, enable our students to take hold of their passions, learn about them, and then develop an action plan to make a difference in their world and community. Yes. Yes. Yes, that's what we want, right? And so anyway, it just talks about how in ministries that he's been a part of, seeing this take shape. And he actually lays out something that he's done, and I think it's excellent. It's so common sense almost. All of us want to see our young people grow and take off with their passions and use that for the mission of the church, but he talks about how they went about and did that. Lastly, a couple of more chapters that really stood out to me. One called Ebb and Flows. basically dealing with scheduling and calendaring. And actually, a previous chapter talks a little bit more about holidays and calendar and stuff like that. And then the last one that really stood out to me is called Organic Relationships, and it's a lot about dealing with parents. And if you're in youth ministry or you're going to be in youth ministry, that is a part of youth ministry, is parent ministry. So really good stuff, excellent chapters. A couple of things that left me wanting more, not because these are really good chapters, it's just questions that came to mind, things that stood out. There's a section about digging deep where it kind of gets into the overscheduling and overcommitting of young people today, and a letter that he wrote encouraging parents to take back their calendar and say that, not everybody, don't let other people dictate what your kid's into, that you set that priority, not them, and how if enough of you did that, then the coaches and teachers and people like that wouldn't be able to just sabotage your kid's life. You wouldn't have to look at church as an extracurricular, but a part of their DNA, a part of their life. It's a good letter. I highly encourage you to read it. But the thing that kind of stood out to me is talking about a lot about parents and how there's this pressure to get your kids into good schools and to get good grades and to get a good job. Well, that pressure exists in the schools too, and I think that that's why we see what we see so many times is, yes, the parents feel pressure, but the pressure also is happening with administrators are feeling pressure from their higher up, and then the teachers are feeling the pressure from the administrators, and the coaches are feeling the pressure to compete and not lose their job. And so everybody is under pressure to do more and more and more, thinking that it will produce better results. And I think that that's the thing, the mentality that I wish would be explored a little bit more, is that doing more doesn't necessarily equate to being better at something. I think there is a quality control that could happen. I just think about all the students you probably know and I know who are basically professionals at things that should be extracurricular. And to me, that it kind of defeats the whole purpose of enjoyment of school. I know he points out in his chapter that none of his kids complained about being overprogrammed, but what they did say, or what he did notice, is there was no joy because it was just work. And that's not good. We want to eliminate that process. I think a lot of times students, because everything's so extracurricular and church becomes one of those things, as they get older, if they're not really raised in the correct manner of being discipled and seeing Jesus not as something that you do, but something you are, and this is a way of life, not just something you do on the weekends or do every once in a while, that we see this drift as they get older of, well, I used to go to math class, and I was part of the math team, or I used to be in band, I used to play baseball, but I don't do that anymore. I've grown out of that. I think church is a lot like that sometimes, where because of the way it's framed, students look back and go, well, I used to do church, but I don't do that anymore. I've grown out of that. We don't want that. We want them, when they leave our ministry, to be fully equipped to make disciples, right? That they've been discipled, now make disciples. So that was something that just left me wanting more a little bit. And the last thing, there was another chapter, the very end chapter, is great. It's a really good chapter about self-care, that we have to take care of ourselves. Lord knows I need to take care of myself better. We probably all need to. One of the things it points out, and it's in page 121, it talks about how the ministry shouldn't be framed around, our student ministry should not be built around us, our talents, and our passions. Totally agree. Our ministry should not just be a reflection of our own personalities, of the leadership's personalities. But the problem is, and the thing that kind of stood out to me is, when we start at a congregation, we can't help to have our personality kind of take over a little bit. I think there's an inevitability, I said that right, to that process, right? that we can't just help that. We're going to move towards that. And when we first start, I think the first couple of chapters kind of deal with how to enter into that process of going into church. But I just think our personality, there's nothing we can do about that, because if we don't make a good first impression, to be completely honest, students aren't going to come around. You know, if you're faking it, if you're not who you truly are, they know, and they are not coming back. They will leave, especially when there's been someone there that they've really looked up to, or someone that they've cared about that has left, and you're coming in to, quote unquote, replace that person. It's hard, especially if, your personality doesn't, mesh, or you're not being authentic. I think that's really hard. So anyway, yes, I totally agree. Our student ministry should not just be a reflection of our own passions and missions, but I also think sometimes it's hard right at the beginning to kind of cut that off. And I think I see what the author is saying, like, especially in the first couple of chapters, about talking about how to inundate yourself into the congregation and not just, blow everything up and make it about you, or make it about everything and never be able to establish what you think God is calling that student ministry to. So anyway, book is Organic Student Ministry by Stephen Ingram. Trash the prepackaged programs and transform your youth group. I highly recommend you picking up and reading. Like I said, short read, but really good information, really good insight, lots of things to ponder. I will start reading something else. I'll let you know probably Monday when I do another video and review it here in the next couple of weeks. Have a good day.